Good morning, everyone. Spring is like deciding whether it's going to get here or not, right? So it's like, can't decide whether it's spring or still winter. It was T.S. Eliot that said April is the cruelest month, and that's what he means by that. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I know many of you have traveled far and rearranged schedules to be here. Your presence underscores the importance of these issues and is greatly appreciated. I understand that Senator Blumenthal will be joining us at around 11 today, and I'm very grateful for his participation. I'm working very closely with my Senate counterparts, and he and I will continue to dedicate ourselves to ensuring that veterans and their families receive the care and benefits that they have earned. And we will strive also to ensure the institution that works to deliver care and benefits operates effectively and efficiently and is protected from arbitrary cuts that undermine its ability to function well. And that institution, you can all guess, is the VA. I want to also thank you more specifically for your advocacy and leadership regarding the toxic exposures we will discuss today, especially at a time when veterans' care and benefits are at risk. And we are inconceivably having to defend accomplishments we have already achieved. It seems incongruent to suggest that we should be doing more. However, you all know, as I do, that the PACT Act was not comprehensive, although at the time I said I wanted as comprehensive as we can make it. I've often said it was not meant to be one and done. It was a down payment, and there are significant populations that still need help. And those populations are no less worthy than those who were included in the bill originally. So we must continue to push. We must continue to fight the battle, this battle, on both fronts. First, to protect what we have, and second, to achieve more. It's what you all deserve. And with your help, we can win that fight. And that brings us back to why we're here today. Often we think of veterans' injuries deriving from action in faraway lands while under fire, as my colleague Dr. Ruiz used to say, in the heat of battle. But we know that this is simply not true. The PACT Act highlighted that point, and the people sitting at this table fight this assumption every day, because we know that the heat of battle often, it's not just the heat of battle where the injuries of war show up. They show up many years later, sometimes decades later. But it's no less an urgent need to serve that veteran when a toxic exposed disease shows up later. This country promises health care and benefits for service members who honorably serve and are diagnosed with conditions stemming from their service. And these conditions are certainly not limited to injuries and illnesses received in battle. That's what I was trying to get at. It means their day-to-day occupations as well. Our country's promise also includes what happens here at home. That promise is not Republican or Democrat. That promise is to take care of all of those who have served and the families who in turn serve them. And sadly, our service members and their families have lived in houses with tainted water and mold on the walls. They've willingly gone to work in environments where they were repeatedly dosed with radiation or hazardous chemicals, and they now fight for care they rightfully earned. Yet somehow, in today's political climate, we've gotten to a place where veterans' care is looked at by many as a burden. And to me, that's outright shameful. Now, as medical appointments stack up, as the diagnoses stack up, and as the deaths stack up, we must further our efforts to address toxic exposures in the domestic sphere and push back against the idea that our service members are only in harm's way in war zones. Here today, we continue the work of bringing these stories to light and getting veterans and their families what is rightfully theirs. And when the PACT Act became law, we saw a surge in VA hiring because it was the only way to deliver on our promise to veterans and ensure they received the benefits they were entitled to. Now, as we seek to expand benefits to deserving service members and families. We cannot let arbitrary cuts to VA stand in our way. That's our fight, and I won't stop pushing to get what you have earned. So I want to thank you for being here. I look forward to a robust discussion today as we further the mission of providing care and compensation for you all. And when Senator Blumenthal arrives, I'll give him a chance to also say something. He's not here today at this moment. So to facilitate today's discussion, we've chosen to divide this topic into two large buckets: environmental exposures and occupational exposures. We'll begin with a discussion of environmental exposures, that is, exposures to chemical, biological, or physical substances in the air, food, water, or soil that can be harmful to human health. For the purposes of the discussion, this principally encompasses groundwater contamination, air pollution, radiation exposure, and exposure to asbestos, mold, and other toxins in housing and other facilities. And in order to get us started, we've invited Jared Harris. Where's Jared? Jared Hayes, sorry about that. And we've invited Jared Hayes from Environmental Working Group to give us a brief overview of the excellent work they've done to document this contamination nationwide. Following that, we'll open the floor to those who wish to speak, and if you wish to, and if you would like to speak, just please raise your tent card like this, and we'll ask staff to do their best to keep a speaking order list. And certainly to my House and Senate colleagues as well, if you have questions, feel free to chime in at any time. So, Mr. Hayes, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jared Hayes. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at the Environmental Working Group, a national environmental health organization dedicated to addressing the risks posed by toxic chemicals. All of us are exposed to toxic chemicals, but military service members, their families, and defense communities are disproportionately exposed from everything from asbestos to volatile organic compounds. And service members are not only exposed to toxins on the battlefield. Toxic chemicals are present in the soil, the water, the groundwater at more than 4,500 sites at current and former military installations in the U.S. In 2023, the VA estimated that 43% of veterans who have been screened since 2022 were found to have potential toxic exposures during their service. Many of these toxic chemicals have been linked to serious health harms, including cancer, reproductive harms, neurological harms, and harms to the immune system, amongst many others. Some of the examples of toxic chemicals routinely found at military bases include TCE, which is known to cause cancer and fetal heart defects, PCE, a likely carcinogen linked to neurotoxicity and liver effects, PFAS, linked to cancer, cardiovascular disease, immune system suppression, PCBs, which are known to cause cancer, immune system harm, and reproductive damage, as well as vinyl chloride, which is associated with liver, brain, and lung cancers. And while many contaminated communities and base communities like Camp Lejeune or Red Hills are well known to the public, many others are not. Bases with high levels of other toxic contaminants include places like March Air Force Base in California, where TCE has been detected at 6,100 parts per billion. And for reference, the safe level, according to the EPA, for TCE is just 5. At New London Naval Submarine Station, in the groundwater, benzene levels were detected at 5,000 parts per billion. At Niagara Falls Air Reserve Station, where some of the highest detections of PFOS in the country have been found, at 1,200,000 parts per trillion. Safe levels for PFOS are less than 1 part per trillion. At Port Hueneme in California, arsenic has been detected in surface water at 12,500 parts per billion, and at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, PFOS was detected in off-base drinking water wells at 141 parts per trillion. Again, the safe level is 1. In analyzing some of the DoD records, EWG found that 63 military bases across 29 states have so far contaminated off-base drinking water wells with PFOA and PFOS at levels above cleanup levels set by the EPA. And the DoD is also a drinking water utility, drawing groundwater to service tap water at least 45 installations, 24 of which have had PFAS detections at levels that are considered to be unsafe. Many current and former installations have been cleaned up, but many have not, and our service members, their families, defense communities are paying the steep price. As I said, studies have shown that service members are more likely to suffer from the harms of toxic chemicals than the general population. For example, a recent study of the banked blood of military firefighters have been, with high levels of PFAS in their blood, have been linked to increased testicular cancer. Other studies of aviators have found increased risk of testicular, prostate, and skin cancers, and additional studies have noted breast cancer rates among female service members and veterans is up to 40% higher than the general population. Unfortunately, the DoD has consistently downplayed the risks by failing to alert service members of the presence of toxic chemicals, by failing to track the presence of toxic chemicals in their bodies, and that's according to DoD's Inspector General reports. The DoD has also consistently failed to tell Congress how much is needed to clean up contaminated bases, according to the GAO. And as we've learned more about the scope and scale of toxic contamination at current and former military installations, the expected cost of that remediation has grown significantly. The estimated cost of cleaning up these bases currently sits at more than $50 billion, which is the highest level in at least 3 decades, even when adjusted for inflation. This $50 billion backlog is the amount of money that's estimated to clean up current projects, and that list of projects is expected to grow, increasing those costs. At the same time of these record backlogs, DoD's annual budget to clean up these contaminated bases, even when adjusted for inflation, is at the lowest level in the last 3 decades. What's more, actual cleanup funding is lower in relation to backlog than ever before. As you can see seen on the chart there, the blue line is the cost to complete, while the budget remains flat at the bottom, even going down. And for reference, in 1994, DoD's cleanup budget to address these toxins represented 1% of the DoD's total budget. But today, it represents less than 0.2% of the total budget. Many cleanup projects are still at their earliest stages, meaning that full cost estimates have not been assessed, and contamination will remain present for years to come. We can do better. Our service members, their dependents, and our defense communities deserve better. We must increase spending to clean up these bases. We must make sure that clean water is provided on base, and we are quickly providing clean water to the neighbors near bases that have been contaminated by department activities. We must do better at tracking service member exposure to these toxic contaminants and alert service members that they are at a greater risk of getting sick. We must preserve the ban on toxic chemicals like TCE so that we're not making the contamination crisis worse. And thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions during our conversation today.
Well, thank you. Great. I see Betty with the, is that yours? Betty Sweeney.
And awareness. Today I'm concentrating on NAF Hatsugi. It is not
Do me a
domestic.
favor, can you just move the microphone closer to you and make sure it's on?
Is it on? Okay. Atsugi has been an issue since 1985, according to the Navy. It was actually 1980 when the problem started. There was a place called the Shinkampo Incinerator Complex next to the base. It was placed in a ravine. It was a privately owned company. So the smokestacks were pretty much level with the base and fumigated the base. It was not operated correctly. It lacked functioning environmental emission control systems, and routinely the industrial and medical waste was not brought up to the proper temperatures. So harmful, hazardous waste was incompletely combusted. Approximately, according to the Navy, 26,000 military members, including 8,000, and families, including 8,000 children, were affected. If we go back to 1980, which it used to be an open burn pit, We at VFEA estimate probably 34,000, and obviously more children. Sampling data was done for years. The Navy did eventually have the complex shut down. They sued the owner in 2001, and the Japanese government came to an agreement, bought out the incinerator, and finally shut it down. Part of the problem is that the majority of personnel and families were never notified. We estimate up to 86% of the population was never notified. Inadequate follow-up is another problem. Cancer latency periods mature at 20 to 30 years for some. In 2009, before the SVAC, the DOD said they would send a list of the military over to the VA to track. We FOIA'd for the last few months, if not longer. VA has no list. So finally, they received the list in March. We received a redacted version. I was able to look at it with my husband's dates of service, and one of our other board members, who's the caretaker for his father, was able to look. His father is not on it. So it's an incomplete list. It also does not take into account the family members. So no follow-up has been done. And also, I want everyone to know we are not here to blame. We're not pointing fingers. We are just wanting to be able to identify and implement solutions. We would love to see notifications made as they were for Camp Lejeune, and that was done in the 2008 NDAA, Section 315, defined how the notifications went to the Camp Lejeune military and families. We would also like to see a registry, which was recommended by some of Battelle Institute and some others that reviewed the Navy's investigation. And that registry was never established. There's never been a follow-on study or tracking. We would also like to see the NASEM review the health risk assessment as definitions of standards have changed and other data has changed over the years. And we would love to see, at least for now with PACT Act, the military members that were there included in with presumptions similar to Agent Orange, and also burn pits, because the exposures are very similar. And in the packet, we did put our board member, Sean Lopez, is the researcher. He put the exceedances of the chemicals and toxins that were found versus what the standards are today. And I want to leave you with the human cost. In 2009, a young woman testified before the SVAC. Her son was sick with a rare cancer. This was approximately the same time frame as burn pits in Camp Lejeune. Asugi was kicked to the curb, just left out. 4 weeks after that, her son died at the age of 17. And unknown to most people that followed it at the time, just over 8 years later, and this was her only son, her only child, her husband, who was a naval aviator, passed away from cancer at the age of 53. They're buried together across the river. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betty. Thank you for being here today. Just remind me the time period, and Atsugi's, where in Japan is that?
I'm sorry?
Where in Japan was the...
Atsugi is in the Kanto Plain. It is southwest of Tokyo. It's in the Kanagawa Prefecture. Mm-hmm. It's kind of west, if I remember correctly, of Yokohama, northwest, I want to say, of Yokosuka. It's on the main island.
Okay, and there was an Air Force base right next to, or there was...
No, Yokota is north, I want to say, and we had Camp Zama, an Army base, was, I think...
There were military families that were living in that area next to that incinerator.
yes.
Okay.
They've closed down Atsugi as far as the air wing. The air wing is no longer there.
Yeah. Members, I want to remind my colleagues, jump in at any time if you have questions. Just let me know, signal me. Next, I want to call on Candace.
Here we go. First of all, thank you so much for holding this roundtable. It's a great opportunity for all of us around this table to have an opportunity to talk with all of you one-on-one. One of the things we're seeing at TAPS, which is the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, we have now in our 30 years of service have actually had 120,000 families seek our support and services. But what we are seeing in more recent time, last year we had 9,000 family members seek our services alone in last year, and 37% of them were grieving the loss of a loved one due to illness. And the majority of those were due to their exposure to toxins. So we see this as a rising problem and a rising concern. But equally, we also know that families have been exposed. So I'll take myself, for instance. We are an Air Force family. My husband was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and we were stationed at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California. And this was back in 1987 to 1990. We were a young Air Force family with many other young families as well. And what we didn't know, we knew there was an inherent risk with aviation. And we actually had a fatality. It was also this was an OV-10 base, so they were training with the Army. And we had a helicopter go down and lost all 6 young men. 2 of them were in my husband's flight. It was a tragedy, something that I'll never forget. I was on the other side of the door knocking, which is why I am now at TAPS. But what we didn't know at the time was there was another inherent risk, and it was below the surface. It was in our water. It was in the ground, and in many of the things that we were working. George, for those of you that don't know, was it was a World War II base that had been closed at one point and then reestablished, and it was a training base. So they used a lot of chemicals to train how would you actually fight fires. And they used it a lot for putting out jet fires. And they also had a lot of fuel that was underneath the surface as well. What people didn't know at the time was this was going into the drinking water. Now, my husband was there for 3 years. He was there every day, 5 days a week. We actually lived off the installation. So our exposure was minimized, but not enough. So over that period of time, what we didn't realize was that they were starting to look at George. And in 1990, it was actually added to the EPA Superfund site. So this was the year that we left, late in 1990, and the base was BRAC'd in 1992. So that is 33 years later. There were nearly 100,000 families that came through George Air Force Base. And when you think of Superfund sites, this is one of 722 Superfund sites. So when I'm using George as an example, we could put this across the country and talk about other bases as well. But since that time, my husband and I have never been officially notified. It's been 33 years. And to my knowledge, other families that had been stationed at George had never been officially notified. So like Betty, what we're asking for is transparency, notification process. We also agree that there needs to be a registry so that people at least can self-identify and add themselves, and I don't mean just the service member, but the families as well should be self-identified to the registry. What we'd also like to see is the ILR, the Individual Longitudinal Exposure Record. We would like to see that not just be used by VA and the DoD. We would like servicemen and women and their families to be able to access them. Right now, a service member or veteran cannot access their own ILR. It is being used to track where they might have been exposed to toxins or environmental hazards, but they can't even see what's in there or even make sure where they were stationed is added. And there's some MOSs where they're a little more secretive and they haven't even put them necessarily in the ILR. But we would also like to see an ILR 2.0 where families would be added to this as well. And one of the things we've been asking about is, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could take ILR and then the electronic medical records and use these together to be proactive and reach out to our veterans and their families and get them early notification? One of the things we talk about at TAPS is there is a huge difference between stage 1 and stage 4 cancer. We can save lives if we are proactive. So those are the things that we're looking at, and we are really seeing an uptick. And I unfortunately believe that this is, when you look at even mortality, only 3% now are hostile fire that we're losing when we're looking at the amount of people. Of course, suicide is a high level as well. But both suicide and illness loss are our highest amount of survivors that are coming to us. But I appreciate this opportunity, and I'll let others talk. But thank you very much.
Sheila, you have a question.
Yes. So my question is, as we're talking about self-identification, you triggered something. What we're looking at is there's a lot of cuts going on in the VA, and more people are being pushed out to community care. But there's a cultural competency separation there where a lot of people in the community care, the doctors, may not have seen enough veterans to understand that, oh, this symptom seems like what we saw in Camp Lejeune. Do you believe that if we had a requirement, accreditation, where now any doctor who's participating in servicing our veterans in community care, that they actually went through training so they could be able to identify people who were exposed to symptoms, let's say at the burner pit, or symptoms in a certain base location that had water poisoning? Do you think that would benefit an additional layer to not self-identification, but also helping the doctors identify for their patients?
Yes, absolutely. We do see that when we're looking at community care, it should be in conjunction with VA care. VA care is tremendous care. It's making sure we have proper access to that VA care. That's the real key. But when that care is not in the best medical interest of that veteran, then using that community care as well. But you're absolutely right. We need people that are trained to see that and to understand what they're looking at. One of the things I didn't mention about George Air Force Base, it also, because of not just PFAS, but TCE and everything that was in the soil, we had a higher rate of miscarriages and infertility problems. And we even, one of our dearest friends had a very deformed child who only lived a year. I took her almost weekly to UCLA Medical Center since I knew the LA area, and she only lived a year. And this was something that was not talked about. Many of us were pregnant. I was pregnant with our daughter, but I was living off the base. We ended up using the hospital there on base, but we didn't know the inherent risks. And I heard later on people were told, don't get pregnant at George. No one told us that. So once again, if this is something that was beginning to be known, why weren't we notified?
Nikki Budzinski.
Very much, Ranking Member Takano, for bringing this roundtable together. I represent a district in Illinois where Scott Air Force Base is just a little bit outside of my district, but I do a lot of work with the Air Force Base, and I know that PFAS is something in the forever chemicals or something that they're very concerned about getting into the groundwater there. And I don't think that concern is unique to just Scott Air Force Base, of course. One of the things I've been very concerned about with this administration is really the cuts to research in the veteran space and the impacts of what these forever chemicals and PFAS will mean for veterans that are seeing exposure in groundwater or otherwise. And specifically kind of lifting up research and cuts in the female veteran space as well, that we really need to be doing more investment and seeing big concerns around more of a scale back rather than a further additional investment. I did just have a few questions and wanted to actually ask Ms. Torres this question. This is related to the PACT Act, though, is if you could kind of speak to what you believe some of the most positive outcomes that you feel like you've seen from this investment, from the passage of the PACT Act, in supporting our veterans.
Sure. Do you mind if I read this little statement?
Oh,
Just 'cause
sure,
I think
yeah,
it'll
go ahead.
put some perspective. So Chairman, Ranking Member, and esteemed participants, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Burn Pit 360 and the toxic exposed veterans and families we serve. The Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our PACT Act of 2022 was more than a policy win. It was a formal recognition of a reality veterans and their families have been living with for decades. It acknowledged that the battlefield doesn't end when service does, and that toxic exposure from burn pits, contaminated water, radiation, and more has left a lasting legacy of illness, suffering, and death. That victory, however, came at a great cost. We slept on the steps of our nation's capital. We held fire watch for those whose bodies no longer could. Our presence was a reminder that these veterans exist and that their injuries are real, and that our country owes them more than silence. I don't know if everyone got a copy of this, but I have one here. It's a graphic. And so since the PACT Act's passage, over 6.1 million at-risk veterans have received toxic exposure screenings. 1.5 million PACT Act claims have been approved at a 74.3 rate. Over 796 veterans have enrolled in VA healthcare, a 37% increase, and more than 43,000 veterans will receive a new cancer diagnosis this year. But this is not the finish line, it's the foundation. We're here today to emphasize that preserving the PACT Act's funding, infrastructure, and implementation is essential. The systems that have been built to identify, treat, and compensate veterans must not be undermined by shifting priorities, political negotiations, and lack of will. Burn Pit 360's independent registry now includes over 8,300 veterans who voluntarily reported exposure and illness, often long before the VA would listen. This data is not just numbers, it's proof of what we've long known. Toxic exposure is a slow-moving casualty of war. So we strongly urge that Congress safeguard this progress. Our veterans deserve consistency, not instability. They deserve care, not contingency plans. As we explore legacy toxic exposures here at home, at Red Hill, Fort McClellan, in military housing and beyond, such as those veterans exposed to toxins while serving at the Panama Canal Zone, we must remain vigilant. The scope of exposure may shift, but our responsibility and moral obligation does not. So thank you for that. But like I said, if you didn't receive a graphic, I mean, we've seen, just hearing everyone's stories of where we were 15 years ago, it's heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching, because I feel that we shouldn't have to be our own lawyers, doctors, researchers, and that's what I'm witnessing today, is a repeat of what happened even 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Your question was, what have I seen in a positive way for, again, hearing the stories of the families, the survivors, who are now not having to figure out how to put food on the table, not having to chase around witness statements while watching their loved ones die. They beg for those last hours of their lives next to their loved ones. So I've seen a lot of great progress, but I'm also witnessing, along with our also amazing organizations and families here, that there are cuts happening. And so that being gutted is gut-wrenching. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And if I could maybe just ask one other follow-up question. I appreciate that. If I could maybe ask Ms. Springer this question, because you did bring up, Ms. Torres, the cuts. You know, if 15% cuts actually come through the VA, and that's at the staff level cuts, maybe a question for Ms. Springer is, you know, what do you, best and worst case scenario, how do you see those types of cuts negatively, or I guess positively, impacting the implementation of the PACT Act and its coverage?
Okay, well, thank you for that question, Congresswoman. Right now, we are monitoring the situation, and we've been in communication with VA, and they, as you know, they're assessing their personnel staffing structure, and we should know more in June when they finalize their plan. But we are keeping a close eye on that, because we do get questions from our members regarding the same kind of topics. So that's where we are right now with that topic.
Ranking Member Brown, I'm going to call on you after I call on Mandy. Mandy, go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for hosting this. I also just want to take a moment to thank all of our veterans in the room, those who have served, and our military families. Thank you so much for your service. I wanted to highlight, especially for the media that's here, while I do still serve on active duty, I'm here today in my civilian capacity representing impacted families of the Red Hill water crisis, including my 2 children who were 13 months old and 3 years old when they were poisoned by the Navy. Quickly, for those who don't know what Red Hill is, in 2021, in May of 2021, there was a 20,000-gallon jet fuel spill that compromised the drinking water system on Oahu, Hawaii. This water system serves 93,000 predominantly military families, but it's important to note that there are Native Hawaiians who do live and work on that drinking water system. The Navy didn't capture all the fuel when that fuel spill happened. They also didn't report it to the 93,000 people. They didn't inform us. Slowly, we were being poisoned throughout the summer, and the fuel that they were not able to capture finally ruptured in a pipe, a PFAS pipe, actually, a fire suppression line. And in November of 2021, that remaining fuel did leak and compromise the drinking water system. Thousands of families cooked their Thanksgiving meal with jet fuel contaminated water, including mine. Symptoms that we all experienced: gastrointestinal issues, dermatological issues, vestibular dysfunction. Those were the initial symptoms that we all had. And what is sustained is long-term neurological issues, chronic pain, hair loss, permanent hearing loss, mental health issues, cognitive and memory issues, attention issues, respiratory issues, including my now 5-year-old who has permanent lung damage from the inhalation of the fumes. Miscarriage. I'd like to note that I lived on historic Ford Island, in a home that had survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. There were 17 homes there on Luke Field. I know all too well how common miscarriage is because I've had one myself. 5 women on my street got pregnant all around the same time. 4 of them lost their child to miscarriage. The woman who lived in my home before I moved in had a stillbirth. Over the past 3 years, may I just say I'm very grateful to be here, but it's very disheartening at the same time. I'm also grateful for people like Rosie Torres and Dave who have paved the way for people like me. Because of your guidance and your mentorship, we've been able to make some headway. I think that we're the most recent toxic exposure event of what we're speaking about today. But because of your guidance, I just want to provide an update. The CDC and ATSDR are involved in Red Hill. To date, they've done 2 ACE studies. Those are self-reporting studies of symptoms. They've done a medical records review, which we still not have access to. Those have not been published. And they've also started a long-term public health assessment. When the PACT Act was passed, part of that law, Section 510, directed that the VA conduct a study on the human impact of jet fuel exposure. I'd like to highlight that they had 1 year to report that back to Congress. And the most disheartening part of it, despite Red Hill now being listed on the VA's website under jet fuel exposure, just below Camp Lejeune and tucked in between with K2, Red Hill was not looked at in that literature review. 93,000 people were impacted. The other significant group that was not looked at was Camp Lejeune, an event that happened 30 years prior to our water crisis. I would argue that Red Hill is a Camp Lejeune 2.0. But I refuse, after flying out to Camp Lejeune and touring the base and stepping foot in what is known as baby heaven, that piece of land that was donated by the state of North Carolina to families who buried their children, unfortunately. The reason I'm here today, and the reason why I'm using my voice while still serving active duty, is because I refuse to bury my children. I refuse for this to continue. I don't want to be 30 years down the road fighting this issue. DHA, the Defense Health Agency, conducted a study, an EpiDaddy study, which showed increased neurological, migraine, and esophageal issues. We now have a registry in partnership with the University of Hawaii, which is huge, and again, recommendation by Rosie. And just in January, we launched and we're funded for a National Academy study, which we're grateful for, and that is hopefully will pave the way for things like presumptive conditions and how it is that we understand jet fuel exposure. But what I'd like to really highlight, which most folks, and Jared, thanks for paving that way, have highlighted, is just this has been going on for a long time, and there's not been a lot of lessons learned. The problems that I see, again, from just going through this, is that, when we raise our right hand, we know that there's inherent risk. But on the flip side of that, we as an organization, as an institution, have an obligation to take care of our veterans, and that's not happening. How it happens, how I see this happening, is that we have to be proactive with medical care. And that starts with adequate medical testing at the first time or the first known event of toxic exposure. When Red Hill happened, we knew. The Navy knew for 6 months. The Navy knew what the toxin was that we were all being exposed to. They knew when several thousand people ended up in the hospital. And I, as a mother, begged for testing, hair, skin, nails, take a body part if you have to. I want to know what it is that my children have consumed. The Navy somehow thought that they reserved the right to know more about what my children were being exposed to than I did as their own mother. We didn't get testing. And what I found from going through all of this and through a court case is that no testing equals no evidence, equals no indication of long-term harm, which then also equals no incident to service. And then we send our veterans out and they're fighting 30 years later for care. Medical testing has to be the number one. As soon as we know that there's a toxic exposure, we have to test our people so that we can get data, so that we can no longer say there is no indication of long-term harm. We know that's not true. The next thing is that I'm asking for is mandatory medical monitoring. I'm a former cab commander in the 82nd. I had aviators. We have fuelers. We have folks that are exposed to this stuff in an occupational environment all the time. We say that there's mandatory medical monitoring, but we know that's not true. Every year, these people who are exposed in the occupational setting or in a known toxic exposure like Red Hill should have adequate medical monitoring. Let's test their blood, let's test their lungs, let's test their cognitive function, let's continue to get data on this. The next thing is, and we talked about it, the lack of transparency. Again, when the Navy failed to warn, they took away my right to protect my children. And again, I'm here not to speak about just my own kids, 93,000 people. When I came to Hawaii, it was Welcome to Paradise. I had no idea what Red Hill was. And the people who are coming to Hawaii today have no idea what Red Hill is. And that is because we're not informing them. I believe that we should have an addendum to the leases. If you were going to live in military-based housing, you should be informed. You should be able to make a conscious decision about what it is that you're walking into. What happens at Red Hill is, in the Red Hill drinking water system, you come to base, you move into a house, and you have no idea that jet fuel, because I didn't, leaches onto porous materials. So our pipes have not been replaced, our basic plumbing have not been replaced, our hot water heaters have not been replaced, our basic things that we put in house like dishwashers and freezers that have ice makers, all of these parts and pieces are porous materials that jet fuel leaks into. And while we have flushed the system over and over again, that's like slapping paint on a moldy barracks room. It doesn't take care of the environmental problem. There is still TPH and water test today as we sit here in this roundtable. And the thousands of people who come in and out of Hawaii have no idea, just like me. So I'm fighting to get leases updated. You have to sign and acknowledge that you're moving into a home that has had contaminated water, that there are still total petroleum hydrocarbons in the water system today. Every service member in their family reserves a right to know that. And the last thing I'll say is, we have really great Department of Defense instructions, and I'm a personnelist in the military, so there's only a few things that I can pay or a subject matter expert in. And hazardous duty pay is something that we owe our service members. Hazardous duty incentive pay is defined in DoD 1340.09, and there's a specific section in there for toxic fuels and propellants. It's $150 a month. I have fought for hazardous duty pay because our service members were not issued proper PPE when they cleaned up the system. Our service member, many of them today, are still showering with water bottles. Access to clean water is a basic human right. If we are not supplying absolutely clean water to our service members, then at a minimum, they should be paid hazardous duty pay and issued proper PPE. An alternate water source in Hawaii for a family of 4 is approximately $150 a month. That's why it's important. When I come here to Congress, and I've reached several times, people look at me like I have 4 eyes when I ask for $150 a month. But I also like to point out that during COVID, and being a paratrooper myself, we made exceptions. When soldiers were not meeting their obligations during COVID because they couldn't jump out of airplanes, we were still giving those service members $150 a month, and they weren't performing their jobs. We have service members in Hawaii now that are handling toxic fuels and propellants, and they're not being paid hazardous duty pay or being issued proper PPE. Thank you.
Wow, this is quite overwhelming to hear. Ms. Brownlee, Ranking Member Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to thank all the witnesses here. I mean, your testimony is so compelling, and I know it takes a lot of courage, and all of you have been advocating for your issues for a very, very long time. So when you say, I'm happy to be here, but frustrated to be here, know that we understand what you're saying. And it's just, it's tragic that these things haven't been dealt with. I mean, I know in my district we have the Santa Susana Field Lab where we had a partial nuclear meltdown in my district, and we've been trying to clean that up for, I don't know, 25 years. And there were young children who had retinoblastoma cancer that was just concentrated all in one area in my district. And so I understand, I completely understand, but it is so frustrating that the government, federal government, particularly with our men and women who've served our country, that we are not paying deeper attention. So thank you all truly for being here. I just had 2 quick questions. Mr. Hayes, you talked about Port Hueneme and arsenic. First I've ever heard of it. I represent Port Hueneme. I need to know more, so I will follow up with you. You also referenced about women with breast cancer, 40% higher in the military than outside of the military. I'm just wondering if you have any other statistics on women and cancer. You know, are there any other cancers that are obviously higher inside than outside? And even those cancers that would affect men and women, any relationship to women having higher degrees, let's say lung cancer, or higher degrees of lung cancer than men who serve in the military. I'm just curious whether you have any kind of data like that. We don't get it from the VA very often, so.
Yeah, there are a number of studies that have linked increased risks of cancer to the military service specifically. Breast cancer obviously was one of them that has been studied closely. There has been some link to, there is more screening, but due to the exposure to toxic chemicals throughout everyday lives and through water and air, yeah, certainly cancer rates are increased. I don't have the specific studies on hand, but we're happy to get them.
I know a source to go to.
Okay.
So
Yep.
that's the most important thing. And just quickly, Ms. Wheeler, Ms. Wheeler and yes, thank you. Particularly, Ms. Wheeler, you're talking about, you know, Victorville and the Air Force Base, George Air Force Base, and all of the recommendations that you made. I have a bill that I'm going to reintroduce this cycle, supporting military families exposed to toxic substance acts. So, but based on the recommendations that you've put forward, the bill seems highly inadequate. It seems like the recommendations that you made need to be, you know, really included in that. But in terms of the recommendations that you made, are there bills out there that include everything that you talked about?
No, and we would love to work with you.
Very good.
You have been a champion, and we really appreciate you. But yes, we would love to incorporate that if it hasn't yet been introduced, which you have mentioned. We would love to be able to find ways to put that. When we talk about EILER and even having the registry, which Betty mentioned as well, a lot of us are going to say similar things, the transparency, the notification. So I think that's important, and how we can weave this into that. Not just locations here. I do think of Oksughi a lot. It's been the forgotten place. And so when we think about domestic toxic exposure, we need to think about military bases as a whole and where our families have been exposed. And some of that is overseas as well. So we would love to work with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I yield back.
So, I realize we're going to try and get to everybody, but we're going to kind of shift focus. I'd like to pause on the topic that we've been discussing for now. And we should have time to come back to it if everyone wants to add any additional information. But I'd like to now turn to a discussion of occupational exposures related to military service. That is, exposures that stem from contact with potentially harmful substances or situations that occur as a result of one's ordinary work in the military. Now, this could include, but is certainly not limited to, substances that could potentially lead to infection or disease. For example, chemicals, ionizing radiation, fumes, dust, and gases that can be harmful to human health. In order to get us started on this topic, we have Ms. Christy Foran from the RAND Corporation, and is going to give us an overview of occupational exposures related to military service and RAND's research on that topic. So Christy, there you are. Is it Foran or Foran? Foran. All right, Christy, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for including me. I'm thrilled to be here with this group. And I'm an environmental toxicologist. I've been working on chemical exposure and risk assessment issues for about 25 years. Been at RAND since 2019, and before that, I was with the research arm of the Army Corps of Engineers. My challenge today is to talk about domestic occupational exposure to chemicals. However, chemicals combine with other types of exposure in order to affect health. So exposure to extreme or repetitive physical conditions like noise, vibration, light, temperature, pressure, all of those physical conditions have health impacts. And also, even in domestic, non-combat situation, exposure to trauma will have physical impacts. Those factors play into occupational health along with the chemical exposure piece. And our military personnel and workers on our military installations, like city workers and industrial specialists, deal with hazardous chemicals as part of their jobs. In terms of municipal occupational exposure, firefighters, for example, are exposed to potentially harmful chemicals in their job at the locations where they train and where they live while they're on duty. This includes PFAS, which is found in firefighting foams, and it's already been mentioned here, and other chemicals that are in the smoke of burning structures or burning vehicles. Those exposures can lead to respiratory problems, cardiac issues, and increased risk of cancer. Also, city utility and transportation workers face risks. They deal with fire suppressants. They deal with fuels and other dangerous substances, including potentially infectious biological agents if you're talking about emergency medical services or wastewater treatment. And similar exposures are expected for service members who perform those functions on our military bases. In terms of industrial exposure, some service members have jobs working with munitions, fuels, solvents like degreasing agents, reactive coatings, and metals, and these workers face the same hazard as any industrial counterpart. Working with metals, for instance, can result in exposure to heavy metals like lead and cadmium, and these are well documented in terms of their health effects. Radiation is a concern, especially for those involved in nuclear roles. Military personnel working with aircraft risk exposure to jet fuel, and jet fuel's been known to have those effects, especially respiratory system, nervous system, and cancer risk. Some occupational specialties are chronically exposed to trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, that's TCE and PCE, which have been mentioned here already. That includes weapons specialists, corrosive control technicians, and jet engine mechanics. So the main point I want to convey is that our military personnel face a wide range of occupational health risks, just like you would see among city workers and industrial employees. And for all of these occupations, keeping careful records, it's necessary to track those exposures and improve safety. It's critical. But keeping track of these exposures to identify the potential health consequences is a challenge in part because they're two systems that have to work together in concert over a long period of time. So DoD and the services are responsible for identification and measurement of that chemical exposure. This is especially challenging because that exposure may not be recognized as something that's important to track until sometime after the fact when health consequences are raised. And the Veterans Health Administration bears the cost and consequences that may occur years after that exposure and in combination with other exposures and other risk factors. So transparency and accountability, as well as detailed activity and exposure records, are necessary to put those potential causes together with the exposure. In conclusion, domestic occupational exposure to chemicals on installations includes municipal type exposures to hazardous substances in jobs like firefighting, utility work, and transportation, and industrial type exposures, including risks from radiation, heavy metals, solvents, among other things. And the biggest challenge is to monitor those exposures and to keep and share detailed records so that health consequences that may arise years later can be linked back to that exposure.
Thank you, Christy Foran. I'd like to now call on Dave Crete, Invisible Enemy.
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano, and the rest of the members of Congress that are in attendance for putting this on and giving those of us, like me, who's never had that voice in one of these rooms, the opportunity to speak and address our issue. I represent a group of people that don't have a dot on that map. I worked in an area that's called the Nevada Test and Training Range. It's a place that people think mythical green people are at and things, but it's not quite so cool, but cool enough. In our service, we never knew what we were being exposed to. Our commanders didn't know, and sadly, most of our commanders are dead. My dormitory was 2.3 miles away from a nuclear test. Front gate of my base was 5 miles away from a nuclear test, 6 miles away from a nuclear test, 8 miles away from a nuclear test, and 13 miles from a nuclear test. In 1975, the federal government did an environmental assessment of where I worked. Mind you, 1975 they did the assessment, 1979 they built my base. In 1975, they said nobody should be there. They said if somebody does go there, they should only be allowed limited access to limit exposure. Instead, they went with what was behind door number 3. They said the juice was worth the squeeze, and they were bold enough to put it in writing. They said the benefit to national security outweighs the future. Excuse me. It outweighs the future environmental liabilities. There's 3 things on NTTR. There's sagebrush, known as tumbleweeds, there's horses, and there's people. I would like to think that their liability, at least they were considering it to be the people. So I was stationed there in 1983 through 1987. About 10 years ago, Facebook, wonderful social media, we started finding one another that we worked with. And at the very first barbecue, which was at my house, there was 8 people in my backyard, including myself. It was kind of before the real kickoff, so it's a bunch of old guys sitting around drinking beer and talking. The conversation came up from one of the guys that says, does anybody here have tumors? I instantly spoke up. I had one the size of a grapefruit removed from my back. Now you won't unsee it. There's a little one on my forehead, there's another one on the top of my head, and there's about 20 more around my body. Okay, there's 3 on my thyroid, there's 1 in my lungs. I have a brain cyst. I have brain atrophy. Left side of my brain is shrinking and dying. That's not too bad. I'm one of the healthy ones. Average age of death for our unit is 65. In the last week, I've added 2 people's names. We now have 462 that we know of that have passed. Youngest being 33. I don't know anybody yet that's made it to 80. Our issue is not that, like so many others here, have to prove that the contaminations have caused a problem. The Department of Energy in 2000 was able to have a bill signed by President Clinton called the EEOI CPA. That bill took care of the person that cooked my cheeseburger at my chow hall, but refuses to take care of me, the guy that ate it. Just think about that. So the radiation exposure that we experienced was for 4 years. We lived up there. They knew when they did the assessment that our air was contaminated, our soil was contaminated, and our drinking water was contaminated. So the water that my food was cooked in was contaminated. The water that I showered in every day was contaminated. Worse, is the fact that my wife had 3 miscarriages. One of the guys that I worked with, his wife had 7. All 4 of my children were born with birth defects or significant health problems. 1 was corrected surgically. The other 3 will never be corrected. And they live with it. It's not their fault. I'm not saying it's mine, but I brought it home. It was my DNA that was permanently altered from low-dose, long-term ionizing radiation exposure. I am asking that Congress please allow us to get the benefits that every other veteran has earned. We're not asking to be special. We're asking to be equal. We all had these insane top secret security clearances and did the cool kid stuff. It was the greatest thing in the world, and I do not regret it. Because to regret that job would regret the rest of my life that I've lived, and it's been a great life. And I'm proud of what I did. Every member is proud of what I did. But I sit in front of you as 1, being alive, and 2, being healthier than so many others. So this opportunity I appreciate. But I ask that we become an equal member of the veteran community. And strangely enough, it's a huge ask. There's so many things that I could say. I speak about this for days, but thank you for giving me the voice. I will answer any question from now until the end of time. But Congressman Takano, thank you for your words that you've said before about us. And welcome, Senator Blumenthal. I know it's not my job to welcome you, but thank you. Thank you to all the members and everybody else here that's participating. It's an incredible experience.
Well, Dave Crete, thank you for that testimony. And I did see a bit more extensive reporting through the investigative reporting that I saw. And just know that I've been haunted by what I've learned, and I won't stop fighting for you all and everybody here until we get you what you're due.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Now, I would like to welcome my colleague from the Senate, the ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Senator Blumenthal. Please make sure you turn on your mic because we're being recorded. And, your opening statement.
Well, thank you for the welcome. Not your job, but I appreciate the welcome. And I want to thank Representative Takano, the ranking member on the House side. I'm Richard Blumenthal, senator from Connecticut, ranking member on the Senate side, Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and I want to thank him and my colleagues on the House side for having this roundtable. I apologize for being late. We're in the middle of a bunch of other stuff over there, and we have a vote coming up, so I'll be limited in my amount of time. But let me just say, nothing is more important than the topic that brings you here today. And I have staff who have been monitoring. We're recording what you're telling us. We're going to use that testimony as evidence for stopping the crisis that is unfolding before us at the VA. It's a crisis that, in a sense, is a self-inflicted wound. The PACT Act has been successful so far. The benefit claims have increased 27% in 2024 alone. I'm sure you're more familiar with these numbers than I am. The VA has processed 2.5 million disability benefit claims. We want to make sure that we continue that momentum. But the prospect of 80,000 or more staff cuts raises the issue of whether the progress can be sustain. And we're going to fight to make sure that the PACT Act is implemented as thoroughly, promptly, and successfully as every one of you and every veteran deserves. I have two sons who have served over the last 20 years, one as a Marine Corps combat officer in Afghanistan, the other is a Navy SEAL. They know about this issue. They've told me about it personally. I've talked to countless other veterans who have informed me in great depth and passion about the toxic chemicals, not only at burn pits, but elsewhere, that they've been exposed to abroad and at home. So I just want to thank every one of you for keeping faith with your brother and sister veterans, for giving us the benefit of your advice and counsel and the facts that you bring to bear on this very, very important issue. And I'm committed to continue this fight to increase the pace and intensity of it so that we keep faith with you and make sure that every veteran gets what they deserve. Thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for joining us and adding your circle of influence to what we can get done together. I'd like to call on Danny. Is it Seebeck? Danny.
Representative Takano and Senator Blumenthal, thank you both for giving me a voice here and allowing me to be here. I definitely want to thank all the other folks here. I see a lot of really brave people telling some very haunting and disturbing stories, and the common theme is that they're all preventable. I am an active duty officer in the Space Force, and I spent 18 years in the Air Force, and I am here in my personal capacity today. I want to make sure to get that out there. I think there's a common theme here, obviously. That's why we're all here, and we're taking a lot of casualties, and these casualties are not taken on the battlefield. Instead, they're taken in our workplace. The PACT Act does a great job of trying to cover some of that for people that are overseas, but obviously we need that documentation to cover our folks that are here. I'm representing the ICBM community, intercontinental ballistic missiles. People don't like to talk about it. People are really upset that I'm talking about it. But the fact is that these environmental hazards, and my mind definitely crosses over both areas. People are going to work in these ICBM launch control centers, but then also in the ICBM community, and they're exposed to contaminated groundwater from leaking underground storage tanks and from some of these Superfund sites. They're exposed to polychlorinated biphenyls that were documented in a GAO report in 1994 saying that the military was not very good at cleaning them up and documenting them. And they're also are exposed to the contaminated air from the burn pits, the burning of a material that we would do in the launch control centers, underground in an enclosed environment with recycled air. And as everybody's story, these are preventable. We know about these things. What we have not done is over the past 62 years in the case of the ICBM community is just documented them. I had to go to a VA person and pull some favors to get my ILR. And it says that I visited Poland once. It doesn't mention that I pulled 148 alerts in a launch control center with polychlorinated biphenyls and with this contaminated air and water. We really need to work on the documentation, obviously, and the military is making steps to get that done, but obviously not fast enough. This is urgent. I was diagnosed, and another common theme amongst the team here is that we didn't learn about the environmental hazards and then go searching for a problem. What we learned is that our kids and our friends were dying of cancers and having other illnesses and birth defects and other things. And then we started looking to say, well, why might this be? In my case, I was diagnosed with cancer, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a terminal cancer, 2 years ago. But not by myself, with my friends. We were diagnosed at the same time by a couple of the same doctors. These are all active duty officers, about 42 years old. I now know 13 people, and when I say no, people that I would have a drink with or have a meal with, that are part of my close military family, that have non-Hodgkin lymphoma. diagnosed at the average of 42 years old, about 25 years older than average. The lady asked a minute ago if we have analysis showing increased rates of cancer with the military community. Absolutely. I've been working to get it published for the last year. But we absolutely have it, and it's documented that there's a large cancer cluster in Montana. Probably also in Wyoming. We're going to publish this material, and people are going to be surprised by it. And I think that's what's driving everyone here crazy, is that people act surprised. All they have to do is go to the oncology office in Denver. I can find my Miss Alear buddies there. That's where they are. We're all sitting in the same chairs getting chemotherapy. Some of them are, getting that done today. So what we're really asking for is we need to work on the documentation. We need to absolutely add some of these kind of smaller, unknown communities to the PACT Act so they can be taken care of, so these widows, my widow someday doesn't have to go fight for service connection, because they don't have time to do it, and they don't know how to do it. My group, the Torchlight Initiative, has been successful on a very, very tiny, small scale, but effective at helping people one at a time try to get service connection for some of these widows and partners that have lost their spouses to these environmental hazards. But it's not enough. I don't have the resources to do it. And that's why we come to you to be heard and to gain those resources and to gain that voice to come and help take care of us. So my story is the same as everybody else's. I'm not going to go through a full statement, but please help take care of this ICBM community. We will leave chemotherapy and come here and speak, and while we still can. We absolutely need your help and support to take care of this community. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Danny Seebeck. Thanks for holding up a torchlight. I think Senator and I intend to put a spotlight on all of this as much as we can, for as long as we can, until we get something done.
We wish you well with your help.
Evan Davis. Go ahead, Evan, with firefighters.
Great. Thank you both so much for holding this roundtable discussion and your bicameral leadership and building a safer environment and a safer community for everyone across the country. My name is Evan Davis. I'm with the International Association of Firefighters. We have the honor of representing 355,000 professional firefighters across the country. About 20% of those firefighters are veterans themselves, and among our members are several thousand civilian firefighters that protect DoD installations around the world. Our members on DoD installations serve as both structural firefighters, responding to the quote-unquote routine house fires, car accidents, medical emergencies. And our members also serve as the crash rescue firefighters that protect airfields across the country and across the world. Regardless of where firefighters serve and the mission they do and the work they perform, cancer is the biggest threat to our lives. Cancer is by far the most common killer of firefighters. As you can imagine, we're surrounded by carcinogens throughout our daily work. Certainly when we're responding to fires, the smoke is filled with gases and other products of combustion. Diesel exhaust is a known carcinogen, but probably the most profound and largest driver of the cancer that we're facing is PFAS. When you look at the world in which firefighters serve both on DoD bases as well as other civilian firefighters at local, state, and federal levels, there are two main drivers that we're really focused on trying to reduce exposures. The first is called AFFF. It's aqueous film forming foam. It's a firefighting foam that was very, very effective, and it's full of PFAS. Unfortunately, it is a huge driver, as a number of my colleagues around the table have spoken, huge driver of cancer cases, both for us firefighters, as well as the communities we protect. When those foams are used, it gets released into the environment, certainly taints groundwater, taints other environmental considerations. We really appreciate that Congress over the years has made strides in pushing DoD to migrate away from AFFF. There are fluorine-free foams available that are significantly safer. Other countries have moved pretty rapidly to adopt the use of these foams. From fiscal year 2020 to 2023, the NDAAs have had varying degrees of requirements for DoD to to get rid of AFFF and move towards those fluorine-free foams. There was a deadline for DOD to fully move away from AFFF in October of last year. DOD has moved for a one-year extension of that. The law allowed them to have extensions up to 2026. Our hope, as much as DOD is making progress towards an AFFF free future for our members, we really rely upon Congress to help make sure DOD has both the resources it needs to migrate towards those fluorine-free foams, as well as having the oversight and having those tough conversations with DOD leadership to make sure they're actually living out their duty and their responsibility to help us have a more safe and healthy workplace. Closely related on the DOD side of AFFF is also civilian airports. Our members across the country have the honor of protecting most of the major civilian airports around the country, whether you're flying into major hubs or smaller regional airports. IFF members, proudly protect those flights that come in and passengers who are there, and that's also a place where we need access to fluorine-free foams. The mil spec that DOD adopted in 2023 gives that ability for civilian airports operating under FAA's jurisdiction to utilize those foams. We hope to get more of those foams out there and appreciate everyone's support. The FAA bill last year did include some funding to help civilian airports migrate towards fluorine-free foams. That funding is going to be crucial, and we hope to see in the fiscal year 26 appropriations that comes through, strong funding going to that program. The other main driver of our cancer that we really see a lot of problems coming from is our turnout gear. The protective gear itself that we rely on to protect us from fire is a source of our cancer and is a main driver. Our gear is manufactured with intentionally added PFAS to the gear. PFAS certainly does a good job of keeping water away from substances, but it also does a horrible job of actually protecting us. It's a terrifying day for our members when they realize that the gear that's meant to keep them safe is actually what's killing them. Sadly, as you may know, we don't have a PFAS-free alternative out there. There are lower PFAS gear that's out there. We're doing independent studies to verify their performance and the composition of those gears. But to this date, we still need PFAS-free gear that actually protects us. We appreciate the fiscal year 22 NDAA had a directive for DOD by 2027 to only purchase PFAS-free gear. And once we have that gear available, it'll be critical to have DOD migrate towards PFAS-free gear and actually allow us to have the gear to keep us safe. We've seen also several states follow that example that Congress set by adopting PFAS-free gear requirements. Massachusetts was one of the biggest ones we've had recently. There's a number of states in the pipeline as well that are adopting those requirements for PFAS-free gear, as well as labeling requirements. We would love to see labeling requirements attached to gear. It helps educate our members to let them know that this gear actually doesn't keep them safe. But as my colleagues have all talked about the need to document exposures, to document what's driving our cancer cases, those labeling requirements in the gear as a PFAS-containing item is a critical part of that document trail that we have to build. Moving forward, two of the biggest places our members really are urgently requesting Congress's support is both on developing that PFAS-free gear. We have some legislation that's hopefully will be introduced fairly soon to create a research program to develop PFAS-free gear. This next generation gear, beyond being PFAS-free, we imagine would also be made of material that's more resistant to contamination. Our gear currently today, when we go into a fire, just acts as a giant sponge and soaks up those carcinogens and leaves us vulnerable to secondary exposures long after the fire has since gone out. We need help working with research scientists to have the funding to do that work. We have a long history of realizing the chemical industry has not been an honest partner with us and has not been an honest player in terms of the safety of chemicals. And certainly PFAS is a prime example. So we'd like to see, as part of this research, firefighters and nonprofit scientists leading the way. We really feel strongly that industry, while they may have a role in some of this, can't be allowed to sit at the driver's seat for this work. Secondly, we also would like to have help expanding the death benefits that are available for civilian firefighters to include occupational cancer. In the 1970s, Congress created the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program, which provides death and permanent disability benefits to firefighters and other first responders who were killed in line of duty. The program covers both traumatic causes of death, so think car accidents, explosions, as well as medical causes of death, heart attacks and strokes in the line of duty. Unfortunately, much like challenges that the PACT Act sought to address, for our members, you have to identify what caused the incident that caused the firefighter's death. And so when you're dealing with cancer, which has likely come from cumulative exposures over the course of a career, it's impossible to point to a specific single incident as much as logic can tell us where the cancer is coming from. As a result, the PSOB program, by and large, does not pay death benefits for firefighters who die of occupational cancer. To put a face on this, in 2023, 2 of the many cancer deaths we had in the fire service, one was a gentleman named T.J. Morey, who was a firefighter at NAS New Orleans in Louisiana. He succumbed to cancer at the age of 39. He had 3 children. His family likely is not eligible for this death benefit because there's no way to conclusively prove that his cancer came from being a firefighter. Despite the fact that he was a fitness buff, he smoked no cigarettes, he kept a healthy diet, we can't prove with 100% certainty that his job as a firefighter caused his cancer. And so his family is having to pick up the pieces without assistance. Similarly, in my hometown of Virginia Beach, we had an FA-18 crash into an apartment building in 2012. There was a large fire response. There was a large cluster of cancer cases that happened subsequent to that jet crash. One of those firefighters, Matthew Cheverati, passed away at the age of 44. Also was an avid runner, hadn't smoked a cigarette a day in his life, kept a healthy diet, and his family also is not eligible for those death benefits. As much as we logically know, that jet crash likely caused his cancer. And as we speak, the DC Fire Department is deeply concerned about what the future will bring. We all saw the jet crash earlier this year at DCA that involved a Black Hawk helicopter and a civilian airliner. DC's firefighters spent days diving in the Potomac, sifting through the wreckage, looking survivors. We know there's going to be likely cancer cases that come out of those exposures to the fuel that was in the water and other elements of the wreckage. But again, the PSOB program likely will also deny those benefits if those deaths occur. So look forward to working with everyone to hopefully solve these issues as well as address the myriad of other issues that my colleagues have raised here today. And thank you again for your bicameral leadership.
Well, thank you, Evan Davis. Dr. Dexter has to depart soon, but she wanted to ask or make a quick point. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge, one, I'm a pulmonary and critical care doctor, and a lot of us are the lead occupational medicine folks, and Stella Hines is somebody at NIOSH who I worked with at the University of Colorado. And so when I was a VA doctor and when, just as a VA physician, one thing I formally, not currently, I want to elevate the importance of continuing our support for maintaining the VA care system. We talked about whether it would be important to train community care physicians to identify exposures and connecting those. I will just say that's very hard to do. You don't see enough cases to actually be trained to identify it. It's much better to have that focus consolidated in a group of people who see these veterans. And so I just want to underline the importance of maintaining that. The other thing I want to say is I had a group of NIOSH scientists in my office yesterday who have all been fired. And they are the ones who draw the connections between your exposures and help us identify not just the cause and the effect, but also how to mitigate or decrease the harm for our firefighters. There's so many different ways. We have to make sure when we're writing this legislation that we're protecting NIOSH, that we're protecting the folks who not just will make the data or collect the data, but who will interpret the data and make sure that we are doing the important work so that the information's not just transparent, but there's experts out there who are looking at it to make sure that they draw the connections that you all are really elevating. And I'm just so grateful for you sharing your stories. And it's unfortunate irony that this is coming up right after we've fired the great majority of our NIOSH scientists.
Mr. Chairman, if I...
Go ahead, Senator Blumenthal.
I would just mention, because you made a reference to the NDAA, National Defense Authorization, where I have helped to lead efforts on PFAS. As you know, we've worked through the NDAA to limit the exposure. We're doing the NDAA again. Obviously, we do it every year. Generally, it's bipartisan. It's must-pass legislation. We have to do the military reauthorization. Otherwise, our servicemen and women don't get paid, literally. So this is an opportunity, perhaps, to work on these kinds of issues, again, to tighten the restrictions, to work as well on additional protections. So I'd be happy to hear whatever thoughts you might have. Cancer is the biggest work-related cause of death among firefighters. Cancer. It isn't burning buildings, it isn't smoke inhalation, it is cancer. And the multiples of cancer among firefighters are many times, some forms of cancer, many times that of the general population. So this is a public health challenge in real time for us, and thank you for your testimony today.
So thank you, Senator Blumenthal. And Dr. Dexter, thank you for making your point. I was just on the floor yesterday talking about passage of bills that I supported, but dependent on the work from the CDC. And certainly this granular knowledge about the NIOSH researchers who are housed within CDC. These are the impacts on our ability to make progress on the issue that we're confronting here today. While many of you have highlighted the phrase in the text in the law, which is in the best medical interest of the veteran, let's bear in mind that the best medical interest of the veteran is, in this case, making sure that we have infrastructure at the CDC, research infrastructure at the CDC, and the provider infrastructure within the VA. So making sure that the EMRI, the electronic medical records, provide for the flow of records back from the community isn't going to be enough in this case. It's not. Community providers will not be a substitute for the providers within the VA who have the expertise and the volume of cases and the knowledge base, knowledge about all of this, to be able to connect the dots between what they're seeing presented by that patient. And so this is another vital, I think, pillar that we have to point to why the VA is important to have its own provider infrastructure, and that it all just cannot be farmed out to the community. And so thank you, Dr. Dexter, for that really important insight. I want to call on Scott. I guess, Scott, you also go by Stacker, is that right? Scott Stacker. Alan? All right, so Stacker, go ahead.
Ranking Member Takano, Ranking Member Blumenthal, committee members, thank you all so much for putting together this roundtable. As difficult as these stories are to tell, I can tell you that I feel a lot less alone now than I did an hour and 30 minutes ago when I walked in here. Just been some tremendous stories and I think testimonials of where we all are fighting this great battle. I am here representing MACH, the Military Aviation Coalition for Health. It's an organization that was founded a little over a year ago, but the purpose of it was really to try and bring groups like this together, specifically within the aviation community. And right now, what we're trying to do is seek advocacy for House Resolution 530, which is the ACES Act. I'm a retired naval aviator and a cancer survivor, and during my 23 years of service, I primarily flew the E-2 Hawkeye for 14 years and logged over 3,000 flight hours and 290 carrier-arrested landings. I participated in multiple combat deployments and served as an instructor pilot stateside. I retired, and 4 years later, In 2014, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. No history of that in my family. After the cancer was discovered, and for my 52nd birthday, I had major abdominal surgery to remove the tumor that was growing there. My wife didn't think that was a very good birthday present, and neither did I at the time. But when the surgeon came back in and said that they had gotten all the cancer and that it had not spread, it was a good birthday present after all. But the reason that it was is because it was caught early at stage 2, not stage 3 or 4, and I'll get to that here in just a sec. So as I recovered and counted my blessings, I began to wonder about folks that I had worked with in a past life in the Navy, in the E2 community. And so I established, with some help from my friend here, Danny Seebeck, benchmarking off of the work he did for Torchlight Initiative, I set up what was called the Hawkeye Initiative. Over 2 years, the data that we've collected is as follows. We have documented 162 cases of cancer in individuals who served in the airborne early warning and control community. So that's a fairly small community. It's a rather small aperture. It's the E2 Hawkeye and the E3 Sentry, so Navy and Air Force. But of those 162, 7 of those E2 air crew were folks that I personally flew with. I knew them well. I knew their families. And I was shocked, frankly, to see the numbers reach that level. But again, as we've heard from a lot of the folks around the table, so much of this, and the term that was used earlier was self-identify. I read that almost as self-help. We're going out and basically flipping over rocks trying to figure out, hey, how bad is this problem? And, who should we be talking to and what should we be doing about that? And so your efforts here today, listening to these stories, are a huge leap forward for us. Moving on, what I can say is that those numbers, those 162 cases, seem high, and in my opinion they are, but my opinion is not fact. And that's where the ACES Act comes into play. I think we need the ACES Act to basically take some of the randomness and the uncoordinated and limited access that we have as grassroots efforts and institutionalize it. Turn it into something that can be tracked and funded and can produce a result, not just collecting data and opinions, but actually turning it around, going from incidences to causality and from causality to solutions. And I think that's where we have sort of come at this point today. A lot of us are looking for that causality. We are looking for those solutions that will be driven by the science, not by the emotion. So as I sit here, I do want to just make one comment that I know there has been some discussion about HR 530, the ACES Act, overlapping with the PACT Act. I don't know that I agree with that 100%. In fact, I know I don't, because the PACT Act, although a great piece of legislation and a great benefit to a number of veterans, addresses one small group of veteran flyers, in this case, exposed in Southwest Asia since 1990 and 2001. And I think that sort of narrowing of scope for the PACT Act really deserves to be looked at in a broader study on global military aviation and cancer rates among aviators. So I'll close with just saying that military aircrew health affects national security, and it requires prioritization. We must address the health risks from the unique working environment by allocating resources and a thorough investigation and mitigation. And so, to that end, the ACES Act is essential, and I appreciate your support and advocacy and the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacker. Dr. Morrison, you want to make a point?
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano. I just want to start by thanking all the testifiers for being here today. I'm the wife of an Army combat veteran. I was not in the service. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I know how to work hard. I've done my fair share of 36 and 48-hour shifts over the course of my career. But I did not put on the uniform and put my life on the line for my country. And so I just want to express my profound gratitude to all the veterans and their families in the room today. Your testimony is heartbreaking and infuriating, honestly. And it gives us, I think, a real sense of urgency for the work that we have to do to prevent the deep cuts that are being proposed to many different areas. VA, of course, being an obvious one, but also CDC and NIH. And so I guess I really appreciate it. Ms. Ferran, or is it Dr. Ferran? Dr. Ferran. I really appreciated the way you really laid out the comprehensive list of occupational exposures that our military and their families are exposed to. So I guess my question to you is, do you think we should be doing more research or less research into these issues?
Pardon?
Researcher, so the...
Just hold your answer for a minute. Senator Blumenthal has to depart. I'm going to let you answer the question. But I just want to thank Senator Blumenthal. I want to thank him and mention that one of the reasons why we are doing this roundtable is to make sure that his sons who are still serving don't have to fight the same battles we're fighting here today. And if you want to give us a parting word.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Ms. Morrison just said, my gratitude to every one of you for being the voice and face here today, and you're speaking for so many others, but we need your leadership and your advocacy. It's just absolutely critical. I apologize, we have a vote that's just started, and I know you wouldn't want me to miss it. Certainly the people of Connecticut wouldn't want me to miss it. So once again, I thank you, and I apologize for having to run.
Well, thank you for your partnership, Senator Blumenthal. And Dr. Foran, please continue. Just remind us what the question was again. You asked her.
Given the range and comprehensive list of occupational exposures that our military members are exposed to, do you think we should be doing more or less research into these issues?
I'm a researcher, so my predilection is always for more research. I think in these cases that the exposures are so complex, there's so many additional factors. I think the research benefits in terms of what it might find, but also benefits just in terms of identifying the necessary data in order to put the pieces together. And also, hopefully, identifying those, once we can make those causal links, identifying situations or capacity or technology that could prevent one of those contributing factors, that is also a benefit that you could get from more research. So I think there's an opportunity there to help going forward, as well as provide information for all of these folks who are going through this right now.
I suspected that might be your answer, and I appreciate that. And I just reiterate, I think it adds urgency to our work to do what we can, not only to prevent the proposed cuts, but hopefully to add to our research budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I want to move on to recognize Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Ranking Member Takano, Dr. Morrison, Congressman Garvey, and the other members of Congress that made this roundtable possible. I'd like to thank staff. I'd like to thank my colleagues here for sharing their stories. It really helps put a person's face to the issue, so they're just not numbers. And I feel a common theme here from Candace's, Dave's, and Mandy's remarks was that there is a need to relook at who are making the decisions to open a base on a known toxic exposure site, who's making the decision to reopen George Air Force Base, who in the Navy is making the decision to not tell anybody about the jet fuel coming out. To me, it's alarming when we look at how we evaluate or who signs off on, say, a drone strike at a terrorist if there's potential civilians or a conventional military strike. That goes up all the way to the Secretary of Defense or the CIA director. I think there has to be people more higher up who have that kind of accountability. I feel should be the ones making that decision.
Thank you for that, Jake. So to clarify what you're saying that the accountability for who makes these decisions on opening bases needs to be at a higher level than who has been making these decisions? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir, remember that the same kind of rigor we apply to, say, a drone strike, there should also be, that level of care and attention should be applied to our own service members when they're at home.
I have one question generally. I mean, we talk about the ILR, that it's difficult for active duty and veterans to actually get access to their ILR. The ILR keeps track of the history of where they've been and what they've been exposed to. Folks here are saying that we want to make sure that that extends to also, that transparency about ILR extends to the military families. In the case of Hawaii and Red Hill, so it was the Navy population, they were living on base. Is that what happened? They were living on base, but you're also saying that Native Hawaiians were also exposed to the pollutants in the water. I live not far from Archer Reserve Base. I'm getting earmarks all the time from my water districts, and among them is earmarks to have water pumps and filters to try to, and my water district's like, well, what level is the EPA going to tell us about PFAS and how much do we need to clean it up? My concern is also how much of this overlaps the general population, because I think we're also going to generate political will. Like, we're going to generate political will just because people feel an obligation to our veterans. They don't like seeing our veterans short-shrifted. And I feel we can generate that will. We did so with the PACT Act, and I think we can expand, Stacker, this concern to the wider, that we didn't include everybody. My concern, though, is how much should we be turning up the heat in terms of what's going on with what the military has done with the general public? Like, how much of the general public has been exposed to this?
If I may, sir, a couple great points. So Red Hill Underground Bulk Fuel Storage Facility is the largest underground fuel facility. It's built 100 feet above Oahu's sole clean water aquifer. You know, the military occupied by force many, many years ago, if you know the history of how we came to be in Hawaii. There were parts of the land and neighborhoods that we occupied that we have since given back to the people of Hawaii, but we didn't change out the plumbing system. So when I say 93,000 people, predominantly military families, there are several neighborhoods that are occupied now by Native Hawaiians. And so not only has the Navy been, or has lacked professionalism or been a good steward of the profession, but they've been a poor steward of the environment as well. And you spoke, Jake, about accountability. This piece is hard for me, and while I filed for DoD whistleblower protection 3 years ago, and the retaliation that I faced is the lack of accountability. I'd like to highlight that Admiral Sam Paparo was the Pacific Fleet commander at the time of the Red Hill water crisis. Throughout the entire time, the entire decision, the comms plan, the transparency or lack thereof with the community. If anyone knows, Admiral Paparo was then nominated after the Red Hill water crisis to serve as the Indo-Pacific commander, and that's where he currently sits today. I went to his confirmation hearing because I felt like it was a slap in the face to every service member who had been impacted by the Red Hill water crisis that he would then be given, regardless of his level of expertise in the Indo-Pacific, that he'd be given another opportunity to impact people's lives and military families' lives. At his confirmation hearing, Admiral Paparo vowed to restore the trust with the community. I'd like to highlight that the EPA established the CRI, the Community Representation Initiative, in order to rebuild trust and for us to bridge the gap and to help the Navy and the Defense Logistics Agency rebuild the trust. Since Admiral Paparo took command of Indo-Pacific, the Navy has not attended a single required meeting with the public. That's been over a year. The Indo-Pacific claims their motto is ready now. I'd also like to highlight that our soldiers, our service members, our airmen, are not mission ready if we are poisoning them, if they are sick, if they don't have trust in their own institution, and certainly not if their children, their innocent children, have been poisoned and treated like collateral damage on American soil.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it Marcus or Marquise? Marquise? Marquis. Okay, Marquis.
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano. And for everyone who's here this morning, DAV and MOA put together a collaborative report after the passage of the PACT Act, because we saw, and as we've heard this morning, the PACT Act, being the great bill that it was when it passed, didn't cover all toxic exposed veterans. And as you've heard this morning, on the domestic side, there are a lot of families and veterans that have been affected. And in our report, there are a bunch of recommendations, and I hate that I didn't get an opportunity to speak before Representative Brownlee left, talking about introducing legislation to help take care of the remaining toxic exposed veterans here and abroad, because that's what our report suggests. There are recommendations in our report that would help influence you all as legislators to write legislation to help take care of all of the other veterans that weren't covered by the PACT Act. And just a couple key points that I would like to make, and you've heard around the table, is acknowledgement. When things happen, DOD being able to acknowledge the fact that it happened, from Red Hill to California to Nevada to wherever the toxic exposure has taken place. Acknowledgement is the key. Once it has been acknowledged and recognized that an event has taken place, now we can move on to the next steps. The next steps include the research. We've heard people talk about research around the table, with whether it be NASEMS or any other academies that are doing the research, where people are going and talking about their conditions, talking about what's happening to them personally, or talking about what has happened to their families or in their communities. The research also helps drive what should come from you all in Congress as the legislation. When you hear your members talking about, I have cancer, my family has cancer, my battle buddies that I serve to the left and the right with have ailments and conditions as well, and we all have this one thing in common of where we served or where we were. I mean, that's like me and my family. I live right outside of Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. Luckily, hopefully luckily, where I live in Frederick is on the opposite side of where a lot of medical research took place on Fort Detrick, but there were some contaminants that leaked out there. And when I first moved to that area, there was a huge lawsuit going on against Fort Detrick about families having high cancer rates that lived on the southern portion or just outside of the southern portion of the base. Luckily, where I live is on the northern side of the base, but still, the research is there where families took in information and took in their evidence saying not only did the service member have cancer, but families were affected as well. So research is a key driver as to what should happen with the new legislation that's in our report that we're talking about. And then the other thing is what we're doing right now. This roundtable with VSOs, MSOs, and other organizations that are being affected, putting together a group and regularly sitting down and talking with us on a regular basis about what's going on is a point that we make in our report as well. And then the final component is strengthening the legal framework that goes into these presumptives that are necessary with the exposures that are out here, and shortening the timetable in which it takes from the acknowledgement to the backing up with the research to the information from the service members and their families, to finally reducing that time frame to getting the presumptives passed. Currently in our report, we talk about this whole process that I just named takes approximately 34 years. Listening to the stories around the table, you're hearing that timetable is way too long. things need to be done and legislation needs to be enacted to help reduce that time frame. That way, veterans, service members, and their families can be taken care of and get the health care and the benefits that they've earned. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Marquis. I mean, I agree with you. You know, what powered the PACT Act 1.0 was the tremendous unanimity of the VSO community. And I believe there can be unity around this issue going forward. And one of the most powerful elements of the PACT Act, the first PACT Act, is the presumptives that we did establish, so we don't have to wait 23 years for the research to be there so that we can connect the dots incontrovertibly. We made some reasonable assumptions about exposures and said, hey, these 23 presumptions, which are really more like 300 separate conditions, they're silos, the 23 silos of conditions really equate out to more like 300, right? 300 separate kinds of presentations of afflictions. So we've established an approach, and it's been put into law. We have to defend, like I said in my opening statement, we have to defend it. It's under attack, make no mistake about it. But we also have to complete the job, complete the mission. I want to move on to Nancy. Where's Nancy? There you are, Nancy. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. Don't worry about that Ms. Brownlee's not here. We've got a whole, my staff is here. It's all being recorded. And we probably even have some of staff from the members here. So this is a very powerful meeting that we got people all together. There's a lot of different VSOs here, and I think brains are clicking, and this is the beginning of something new. So go ahead, Nancy.
Right. And thank you for hosting this hearing, and thank you to your staff for setting this up. And thank you also to all my VSO colleagues. Your stories are truly inspiring, and I agree with Marquis, we can do a lot with this forum. I just want to make a couple points actually to reinforce and or complement others already made. And I'll start with the PFAS and the AFFF. And DOD is cleaning up its PFAS on its installations around the nation. It estimates it will need to remove more than 2 million gallons of AFFF concentrate from its facilities and its mobile assets. Just to give everybody an idea of the size and the scope of that particular issue. So please keep that in mind when you talk about this issue. Now, though DOD is moving away from AFFF to safer compounds for firefighting, it did use it both for emergency response and training on base. And where they did, it did seep into the soil, seeped into the groundwater, and that affected not just the service members there, but also veterans who were previously stationed there and their family members. And as brought up by a couple of my colleagues, Betty and Marquis, it's essential to have a solid notification process for all persons affected. Because, and somebody else mentioned, if you can catch a disease in its early stages, much greater chance of curing it. So it's vital that we have a solid notification process going forward for those exposures of both service members and their families. And next, I want to advocate for a piece of legislation. Last session, VFW supported H.R. 4306, the Michael Letchick Military Firefighters Protection Act. And in this Congress, Congressman Bacon just introduced the bill for this year, H.R. 2244, very recently, in fact, on the 21st of March. So we will likely support this bill. And what that would do is establish presumptives for those military firefighters, ease that process to get their benefits, get their health care, and take care of that particular group. And last, just an overarching comment. We've talked about the PACT Act several times, obviously, during this forum. And one of the things in the PACT Act is that presumptive decision process. And when I visited you, Congressman, during our Washington week, the first part of March, we talked about Congress hosting an oversight hearing, call VA in and evaluate how they're administering the presumptive decision process. Because actually, it's a fairly new process. I mean, the PACT Act was only signed a couple years ago, and it's a good time right now to evaluate how is this going? Is it going the way that we thought it would? Is it going the way it's written in law? And if not, what kind of changes do we need to make right now to make it more effective? And also evaluate how well VA is resourced to carry out that program. As Mayor Marquis says, these things take a long time, and VA really should be resourced so they can do more than one formal evaluation simultaneously to get through all the possible toxins and diseases out there that are emerging that they need to evaluate. And so thank you very much for the time.
I'd say in response that VA has not been very transparent about what they're cutting, what contracts they're cutting. I'm very much worried about this particular unit within the VA that you just spoke about. And so I'm very concerned about VA's research capacity generally. We've seen outside of VA, CDC, NIH, HHS, tremendous numbers of scientists being cut on different areas, and so research looks like it's expendable. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of time that we have today, but I want to just recognize, if you have very brief things to say very quickly to get on record, let me just start with, I can't see your name because it's up.
Eileen Huck. with the
Eileen,
National
go ahead.
Military
Go ahead.
Family
And,
Association, and
yeah.
thank you, Ranking Member Takano. I do understand we're at time, but I wanted to thank you for having this roundtable, and thank you especially for including the voices of military families, because as my VSO colleagues have, including Mandy and Candace, have said so eloquently, the family members are also impacted by these environmental contaminations. Military spouses and military kids are drinking contaminated water, breathing contaminated air, living in houses that are infested with mold, and no service member parent should be expected to do his or her duty while worrying about the long-term health of their family members, their wife, their husband, their wife, their children. And so I appreciate everything that's been done to highlight the long-term health implications of these toxins. We think that more needs to be done to increase transparency and accountability for both the services and after the service member leaves the service, so that those family members who have had long-term health impacts can be aware of what their risks are and get the support and services that they need. So again, thank you for including us as a military family organization and for making sure that military family voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, Dr. Foran's testimony about the need to track, the need to do all the prevention work, and we need the medical records all sort of tied together. We'll let Jared Hayes have the last word here.
Thank you again so much for organizing this discussion. It's been great. I just wanted to say as the last point that contamination does not respect baselines and base boundaries. It seeps into our communities across the country. And the longer that we take to deal with it, the more people will be exposed and the more it's going to cost to clean up.
Thank you. That was the big point lingering in my head as to how we generate even greater public support for what we got to do to clean up and to track and to address. So thank you all. Thank everybody for being here today. All the trouble you went through to get here, and we've got work to do, obviously, and we're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.